It's kind of
It's not
quick to
on my side.
I don't know if it's 6:59 or is that 6:59?
This far from the fireplace, and about this far from the fireplace.
Oh. What length is it? Oh, okay.
But the whole lot is like 38 feet wide,
I like wasting YouTube time. Good evening, everyone. It is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. And I would like to call to order this special meeting, which is a joint meeting of the Plan Commission and the City Council for the City of Millwood. So, Lisa, could you take roll first of the Council and then of the Planning Commission?
Yes. Councilmember Vesey? Here. Councilmember Color?
Here.
Councilmember Van Ees?
Here.
Councilmember Sander?
Here.
Councilmember Stravens?
Present.
Okay. Planning Commissioner Ankeny?
Here.
Commissioner Vesey?
Here.
Commissioner Rickard?
Here.
Commissioner Wu? Here. Commissioner Molitor?
Here.
And Mayor Vigil.
Thank you. And so at this time, Chair Ankeny, would you like to open your meeting of the Planning Commission?
Meetings adjourned.
I like that.
I'll open the meeting of the Planning Commission.
So we have a quorum tonight of both the Planning Commission and the City Council. As this is a special meeting, the agenda is as presented. And so we are here to have a presentation from our city planner, Amanda Tanyo, regarding the status update on the 2026 periodic update overview for the comprehensive plan. Amanda, take it away, please.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for gathering tonight. It's been a year since we started the progress, and we've made great strides. The Planning Commission's been hard at work, and we'll cover where we're at in the process, and then a few details related to housing and capital facilities. Okay, so first is we had to complete a checklist review of the entire comprehensive plan and then development regulations and everything last year. We have now got draft versions of everything on the comprehensive side. Sorry, next slide. Comprehensive plan slide, with the exception of climate change and resiliency. That is coming at the end of this month because Spokane County is preparing that one for us, and they'll be coming to do a presentation to the Planning Commission on July 30th. From here, we go into development regulations in 2025 and 2026 to have everything wrapped up now by December 2026. The state did extend the timeline, so we didn't have a June and a December deadline. It is all now December 2026 for the development regulations. And so this is just kind of an update to the slide I went over last year that just shows now everything is December 2026. We are approximately right about in the middle. We are into the green boxes now. Go ahead, Lisa. So last year, you can go down real quick. Last year I went over some of the bills that passed for 2024. Go ahead and continue down. And then there were quite a few that were still left on the table. Well, two of those have come back to us. So go ahead and go down. For 2025, I just attended the legislative session on that. And housing accountability, transit-oriented development, parking reforms, and middle housing are all ones that came back. The middle housing doesn't apply to Millwood, neither does the parking reform because we are too small. The Housing Accountability Act does. And it basically is ensuring compliance with the housing element requirements of the Growth Management Act. We had to do Tier 3 ordinance anyway, so not a huge deal there. And then the transit-oriented development is promoting transit-oriented housing development. We will have more information on these coming as we progress through the development regulations. Under permit processing for housing, we have a new lot splitting that's coming in, and it basically is to increase options through administrative lot splits. So if you have a large parent lot that can easily be divided into two lots and meet the underlying zoning requirements, It can be done administratively. Again, more information will be coming. Unit lot subdivisions I've been talking about for a while. Again, that's utilizing the parent lot, and my best example, honestly, would be Magnolia Village. If that wasn't manufactured homes and just looking at it, stick-built cottages. It's utilizing the parent lot, meeting the setbacks, and then the units themselves can be tighter together because you're utilizing the entire parent lot. ADU self-certification is another thing that may be something Millwood wants to adopt, and it basically allows architects to submit a self-certification on an ADU to hopefully get it through the process quicker. It's an option right now. And then the other ones are just conversions and some building code and development regulation updates. Okay, go ahead. And then there's a few other bills that didn't apply much to Millwood, didn't affect too much. Now, some of the bills that didn't make it, major subdivision reform and clear and objective development regulations, I'm expecting to probably see those come around on the next revision, so for 2026. Whether or not they make it into this periodic update or not, I'm not sure yet. All right, so obviously this is a joke, but what it's going to show is housing is needed in Washington State, and the legislators are increasingly passing bills that make provision of it easier, which means Millwood does have to adjust our policies and regulations to accommodate it, which we've already started doing through the comprehensive planning process. I attended the 2026 update for housing to get additional information as we progress through the HAPT. We have now completed all the requirements in these in a draft form. Go ahead, Lisa. And I will cover each one of these next steps on the subsequent slides. Just a reminder for Tier 3 cities, which Millwood is, we had to look at it at the comprehensive plan level, but even more when we get to the development regulations. If we don't get all the required actions in place, this ordinance supersedes Millwood's regulations in December 2026. So it's really important we stay on schedule. So the comprehensive plan, like I said, is in draft form now. The appendix is coming together, and the climate change, like I said, will be ready for at least a presentation at the end of this month. So it has been a heavy lift, but everything is on schedule. All right, so the first section we're going to cover is looking at goals, policies, objectives, and actions framework. So when the Planning Commission went through and adjusted this, there were multiple things we had to look at. But one of the big focuses we've done is neighborhood spatial scale, form, architectural history, walkability, and open space are all being considered with infill development. So making sure that we really envision what we're planning for. Go ahead, Lisa. No changes were made to the zoning map. We were able to utilize the existing zoning and meet all the requirements. I did ask Welch Comer to add the airport overlay on here though, because we do not have a map that had zoning and airport together. So it does now.
So that's the dash line.
Yes. Continuing down the scale and form, what you have here are some example housing types that have been provided through MRSC, Department of Commerce, and they basically are showing some of the missing middle housing types that we would be looking at. On the left is what they would consider stacked flats in a duplex form. So it is a duplex, but it's top and bottom, and just looks like a really large single-family home. On the right are examples of duplex, triplex, and fourplex. The upper left, I think you saw that probably last year, that would be a vertical triplex. Duplex on the right, that is two-story units, and then on the bottom is actually the fourplex. Go ahead, Lisa. Next, again, some of these were carryover from last year. No, go ahead. Cottage housing, townhouses, which was one of the ones that we discussed pretty in length at the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission felt townhouses didn't fit as nicely into Millwood as some of the other housing types. And so we've designated those for use more in the UR3 zone because they were not required to be in the UR2 or UR1 zone like some of the other uses were. And then courtyard apartments. And then how do these play in and align with our existing housing types? For each one of the zones, I've gone through and taken examples from within the Millwood community of the various designs that we already have. And it was kind of a cross-check to see how everything plays together. And so for UR1, and I will go ahead and read this so that I don't butcher it. This is the updated wording on it. The UR1 designation applies to the eastern portion of the city that has traditionally accommodated single-family detached homes on large lots with space for urban agriculture while allowing opportunities for infill development. The intent of this designation is to acknowledge the single-dwelling residential building type as the primary use with the potential for accessory dwellings, duplexes, triplexes, cottage housing, I believe that's stacked flats and courtyard apartments, and they'd be in a maximum of, or in 2-unit configurations. And other small-scale housing forms that are compatible in scale and form with single-family housing. And then, while permitting a minimum of 2 units of middle housing per lot. Sorry, that's hard to read in the red. So that is UR1 as it is updated right now. UR2. This designation is the predominant residential land use in Millwood with a small area included in the Millwood Historic District. The intent of this designation is to acknowledge the single-dwelling residential building type as the primary use with the potential for accessory dwellings, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage housing, stacked flats, and courtyard apartments, I believe were the other, yes, and other small-scale housing forms in neighborhoods characterized by low traffic volumes, abundant trees, and other landscaping features with easy access to parks and other recreational opportunities. A minimum of 2 middle housing units per lot. That's really hard in the green highlight. And then UR3. This designation is located throughout Millwood and is intended as a buffer between the areas of the city zoned for low-density residential and the busiest commercial areas throughout the city. It allows for higher-density middle housing and multifamily housing up to 2 stories, including townhouses, courtyard apartments, 5plexes, 6plexes, and stacked flats and multifamily units, while accommodating existing single-family uses and allowing accessory dwelling units, as well as middle housing types allowed in UR1 and UR2. The high-density residential district offers the highest density residential uses on the smallest lots located on or close to major arterials and providing easy access to public services and transit. And there were some of the housing types in our UR3. And then C1. The general commercial district is intended for large-scale, auto-oriented commercial uses located primarily along major arterials up to 4 stories, and that was what is already in place. Businesses located in this zone provide goods and services to customers throughout the region. A variety of existing residential development is located in this zone. However, new residential will focus on higher density and mixed use with commercial, as well as allowing hotels and temporary emergency housing to meet Washington state requirements. When we are talking about the C1 zone in particular, there's an area along Trent where it backs up to the UR1 zone. And so we anticipate when we get to the development regulations side of using some kind of stepped setback similar to what we have in the residential zones that'll allow a greater separation from that UR1 zone than we currently have.
Amanda, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
And the only because I don't know, is the city council aware of the task that we were handed as far as the additional housing units we need to provide?
Yes, so last year and then in December when I was presenting, we kept talking about the HAPT and the land capacity analysis. This is Millwood meeting the requirements for those, and we will talk about it a little more in the presentation. And then C2. C2. The interesting thing about the comprehensive plan wording for C2 was it actually wasn't as high-arching and descriptive as the way the development regulations read. So I actually pulled information from the development regulations and put it back to the comp plan to give the overall feel for the C2 zone. So the low-intensity commercial mixed-use district is intended to provide housing opportunities and retail and professional services to a limited trade area. The zone should be developed in a pedestrian scale to accommodate neighborhood and local community shopping needs, to provide variety in housing, and to create recreation opportunities without negatively impacting adjoining neighborhoods. C2 zones shall be grouped along, and this is our new wording, we said Argonne and Euclid, within 1/4 mile of a public transit route, and should be designed to accommodate pedestrians. The zone should create an urban neighborhood and in addition serve several neighborhoods within walking distance or within a few miles, allowing for short driving distances from home to the zone. The zone should serve as a buffer between residential zones and arterial streets, thereby providing an appropriate land use transition. Small retail and service businesses up to 3 stories and apartments or other living quarters will be encouraged in mixed-use structures up to 4 stories for a diverse environment. The central portion of the district along Argonne Road is included in the Millwood Historic District. Automobile-related uses such as drive-up windows would be discouraged. And then the I-1 zone. The light industrial district is intended for small to medium intensity industrial uses up to 4 stories that produce little to no noise or environmental emissions. This zone allows for hotels and temporary emergency housing to meet Washington state requirements. We had no changes other than adding pictures to P1. And then for I2, because there was no I2 section originally, the manufacturing industrial designation, also known as the paper mill alternative zone for the historic Inland Empire paper mill, allows up to 4 stories and is intended to preserve the existing use of the property without negatively affecting the aesthetics of the Argonne Road corridor and the Millwood Historic District, nor the quality of life for surrounding residences and businesses. If the site is abandoned, future uses would be mixed use commercial / residential and light industrial. And that included some pictures of the paper mill site there, as well as the intersection before the project, so that you could see how the paper mill site relates to downtown Millwood. All right. So that is kind of how we were looking at scale and form. Then we take that and had to go into the density and the HAPT requirements. So that was the next lift. And the good news is growth consistent with the current HAPT was planned for in the previous comprehensive plan with a full build out of 150 residential units. That was in the last comprehensive plan. ADUs are being counted towards density in the UR1, UR2, and UR3 zones, and the method for rounding density calculations was worked out. So the GMA required an update for the housing goal, and it is now to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population of the state, promote a variety of residential densities and housing types, and encourage preservation of existing housing stock. And I believe between the Planning Commission's work, that is what has been done. Going through the charts, and I know we're going pretty quick, the first is information about the Spokane AMI median family income. And the one thing I wanted to point out was that in 2025, you have to make over $100,000 a year to be considered an average income. That is crazy. Now, that's why we have a housing crisis.
Well, the house has to make that much, not the
household,
individual.
yeah, so a 4-person household, yeah. And then population and housing growth. We did the LCA back in the fall, presented it in December. We've carried those numbers through utilizing the bulk density standards. And go ahead and go to the next one. The good news is Millwood can meet the projected housing needs that has been assigned to us. And we can also meet them by income bracket. So go ahead. Yes,
What was the specific housing? Cause I've heard everything from 49 to 100 and,
106.
so we have to provide 106 houses for 49 people?
We have to plan for 106, and the difference is the 106 number adjusted for the lack of housing over the years. So we discussed this in depth, and Bobby actually can probably almost explain it better than I can now. But we talked about this with Commerce a lot, and that was the difference. So we have 0.05% of the Spokane County population, which is a 49 person, but we have 106 housing units that we have to allocate for, compared to other jurisdictions that are in the thousands and more. And it's, we have to plan for and accommodate, we obviously don't provide. And go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so this was the first HAP chart that we had to work on. These charts have been reviewed by Commerce. I made some tweaks based on their comments, and those have now been incorporated, and I will be presenting the summary of this to the steering committee of elected officials next Wednesday, I believe it is. So we went over typical housing types, not all of them, the typical ones that we see in Millwood, and then we had to assign assumed affordability. So some jurisdictions went strictly with what the Commerce guidance was. I asked for permission to tweak that slightly for Millwood, because the fact is an ADU in the UR1 zone is not going to be at a 50% AMI. There's no way. It's going to be slightly higher.
Why?
Because of their larger lots, there's going to be more open space there. And so we utilize that for ADUs in the 80 to 100% AMI category, which actually was one of the categories that Millwood was short in, so we were able to accommodate there. And then multifamily is anywhere from 0 to 120%. C1 is utilizing a 0 to 80%, including permanent supportive housing, and then I1 is where we're looking at the temporary emergency housing.
So why would an ADU, a small ADU in UR2 be assumed to be 80 to 120%?
It may be higher, but
Or lower? I mean, it
yeah,
seems to me
all
the
these are
ones-
assumptions, obviously.
The ones I know of there are small, they wouldn't be, they'd be,
In the UR2, they would be, for sure, they're gonna be smaller. UR1, they could be 1,000 square foot ADU, because you can't require less than that.
but
So-
we have down for UR2, we have 80 to 120%, and that, cause I know of some in the UR2 and they're just, you know, like studio or,
UR1 ADUs are 80 to 100%,
right?
UR2 are 50 to 80%. The
Mine's-
other housing types are
Oh,
80 to
okay.
120.
I get it, okay.
Read the next slide. Okay. So then the next chart I had to go through was take all of our LCA data that we presented back in December and plug that in with our assumed, or in our case, our bulk density standards to factor out what our gross would be and then what our anticipated ADUs would be. And Commerce actually capped where you couldn't consider more than 10% of your ADU stock, so basically only 10% of your lots. We calculated at 5%, since we've had such low growth in Millwood over the years. Even with doing that, as we go on to the next one, we're still making our numbers. And so these are the different assigned zoning categories, UR1 being low density, UR2 being moderate density, UR3 being low-rise multifamily, and these are the categories we had to pick from. C2 and C1 being low-rise multifamily mixed use, I1 temporary emergency housing, and then ADUs overall. Totaling 121 units plus 65 ADUs plus 5 temporary. So we met our requirement because we had to have 106 units bare minimum plus 5 temporary emergency housing, and calculating the ADUs also allowed us to meet all the income bands. Go on to the next one. This was what we were assigned, like I talked about earlier, the 106, and then we were assigned out based on each one of the income brackets and the temporary housing, and this is how we meet it. So 121 units, 30 of those units would be in the 0 to 30% category, non-permanent supportive housing, which meets the requirement. Permanent supportive housing, 9, which meets the requirement. 30 to 50%, 25, and we were required to have 21. 50 to 80% because of the ADUs, we got up to 58, we were required to have 12. 80 to 100%, we exceeded by 2, we have 9, and we were required to have 7. And 100 to 120%, 32. And greater than 120%, we got 2 extra, so 23 when we were required to have 21. And then utilizing the anticipated, and honestly, we didn't have anything to compare it to, so I had to look at all the examples of different emergency housing types facilities, and I chose I believe it was a 40-bed example, which is one of the lowest ones, and that got us at the 5 required units. All right, next one. The next thing that we had to look at were barriers to housing development. And so I had to review past projects, we had to analyze current projects in the data, talk with developers, community members, and then review basically all the ways that Millwood can reduce barriers to housing development. And I won't go over everything, but we did find some ways that we can, go ahead, Lisa, on the next one. As we move through from the comprehensive plan into the development regulations, there are some things we can look at, making the processes simpler, the code easier to interpret, addressing funding gaps. And we've already started working with the Millwood Community Association for trying to see how we can qualify as a Main Street community to get funding for downtown. So those kinds of things are what we can look at as we continue forward in the process. Additionally, we need to continue to coordinate with Spokane Transit for system improvements that can help with reducing affordable housing barriers. The next one, and I'm going to only briefly talk about this, we had to do a racially disparate impact analysis. It was a pretty lengthy process. We're still actually refining some of the charts right now, but the end result is, unfortunately, Millwood had racially disparate impacts in the past. One of the biggest things that came out right away was 33.3% of the lots have racial covenants on them. So that was real obvious that we were looking at having to deal with racially disparate impacts. We have gone through the analysis. We've gone back through the goals, the policies, the actions, and the ones you saw highlighted in yellow were adjusted to address those impacts. One of the things was you couldn't necessarily use the term design because design could have a lot of different meanings. That's where we went back to the scale and the form. And so with Bobby's assistance, we crafted some language that fit Millwood best. All right, go ahead. Okay, next was we have to look at transportation and capital facilities as part of the planning process because we have to have concurrency with development. And that was the next big hurdle that we have just undertaken starting in June. And when we talk about concurrency, it means that adequate public facilities have to be in place before new development occurs or within 6 years of it occurring. And so those are the 2 thresholds we have to look at as we go forward. So I went through and worked with our staff for utilities, looked at law enforcement, fire protection, all of the different services and capital facilities we have in the city of Millwood. I had to analyze those for ownership or agreement, so how they're provided, and then look at what the capacity was and the level of service. And so this was taken, level of service basically from the previous comprehensive plan, but it was all consolidated because we had it in multiple sections. So we've now consolidated all into an 11.6. Nothing changed on this, just streamlined and easier to read. Parks. That was our brand new section, if you remember right, that we were working on the Parks and Recreation element. That has now been presented to Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office staff and received a thumbs up. So if it was adopted as is right now, we could apply for grants in the next grant cycle. And the other good news is we can meet our parks overall level of service. But when you throw in the RCO level of service tool, which basically looks at some different criteria, it can help us with applying for our grant applications and showing where the need is. Transportation. Talked with Matt Gillis from Welch-Comer, and I didn't put the entire list in here, but there are some redesignations of some of the streets in Millwood. I realized this when I was reviewing Magnolia Village last year, that we had some inconsistencies within the comp plan itself. Some of the designations didn't match up with what SRTC had. And so we are trying to get those corrected right now. Matt will be talking with SRTC and WashDOT because now is the time when we can apply to get those changed. And so in some cases, we're going to look to downgrade. So where Euclid was listed as a minor arterial before, it's more of a major collector. By utilizing it as a major collector, you can also utilize the speed humps and stuff like you can on Empire. So if these changes go through, Millwood wouldn't have any minor arterials. You'd have a major arterial, obviously Argonne, and quite a few collectors leading into our local street system. But we're meeting all of our LOS, so that's the good news. Water and sewer also meeting all the LOS. Everything's provided. There are a few water improvements that the council's already seen as part of the capital improvement plan for water that was presented a couple months ago. Those have been included in here. And then I conversed to see if there was any major items for sewer that were going to be over a $20,000 cost. There are none anticipated at this time, so we didn't have to add those in, and all LOS is being met. We also had to add in other things like stormwater, schools, library, and then the new green infrastructure. Again, working with the Spokane County Library District, working with West Valley School District, everything will meet level of service in the planning period. And then our other utilities, electricity, natural gas, and then cable, internet, fiber, all that, no issues with provision of those in the planning. The other thing that was not in here before, because you'll see it in a moment, it's been planned for at least the last comp plan, possibly two back, that you had a goal, and we carried that forward, to have a capital facilities plan. When you have a capital facilities plan, you have to look at all capital facilities and equipment. So I established and went through the public works inventory, and we have an itemized list in the comp plan now of vehicles and equipment for Millwood that is meets the definition of capital. Same solid waste and recycling. We had to look at waste management, see if there are any issues. There aren't, so we're all good there. And Planning Commission got a sneak peek at their last meeting of this, but we have a brand new draft. I am still working with our interim treasurer to get this finalized, but Millwood has a capital facilities plan draft now. And as I stated, capital facilities plan is basically your long-range plan on meeting your concurrency requirements. And so anything that needs to be replaced, updated, those kinds of things in the planning horizon are included in this. Go ahead, Lisa. All right. So the CFP includes estimated costs and proposed methods of financing for projects within the first 6 years, and this is sometimes referred to as your 6-year capital improvement plan. Projects that are to be funded each year should be reviewed annually during the city budget process, just like you do now with the TIP in June and stuff. This would be the overarching, so you have projects from the TIP in here, you have projects from the water plan CIP, all these are in one location. A question came up at the planning commission meeting, well, what happens if the TIP changes next year? Do we update this? You can. If you want to keep this current, you can update it once a year. Are you required to? Not necessarily, unless you're having a level of service deficiency, which Millwood is not. And so that's an option. It's totally up to Millwood if you want to update this yearly, if you want to update it bi-yearly, or if you want to wait till the next periodic update. And then the projects and capital facilities included in this have a 10-year useful life or a value of at least $20,000 or more. Okay, good. I'll still have time for questions. All right. So, based on what we found from the inventory, there are no building or facility projects or expenditures in the planning horizon that I was instructed that we needed. So that's an NA right now. Parks. We have the first one that came out was the provision of the Spokane River Access, Sargent Road, Spokane River Corridor. This is the informal put-in that the city already has, but there are, quite frankly, issues with insurance on it. It is not safe. And so in order to keep that available for residents, it had to have some safety improvements. That would be step one, is we planned in safety improvements for that. The second step, if Millwood so chooses, it's been budgeted in, is to have ADA access. Not in the full ADA access sense of the word, because there is no way, without a heavy, lengthy cost, to do switchbacks. It would be detrimental to the shoreline. And so for the safety side, it would be restoring that to a safe access. For the ADA side, it would be adding viewing benches that you can get to, an ADA parking spot, those kinds of things. The next one is Millwood Park, and we are actually going to have another public hearing on the Millwood Master Plan portion of the comprehensive plan in August. But we based it on the Imagine Millwood that was prepared in 2022, that we surveyed on last fall, and the priorities that came out of that. Based on SPVV landscape architectural estimates to basically completely redo Millwood Park, as you had talked about, with all the ADA improvements and everything, it is a hefty estimated cost of just over $3.4 million. How do we pay for that? That's where the park settlement came in. You'd be looking at grants through RCO, various ones. You can match grants. I had already talked with Deb previously about REIT 2 being a potential option for funding that. And then, of course, general fund and donations and in-kind contributions. Looking at a time frame of 2027 to 2029 for that with the next grant cycle. So we wouldn't be in the 2026 grant cycle, it'd be in the 2028 grant cycle. Go ahead, Lisa. Okay. The next was the Spokane River Access, Spokane River Property. There was not one consensus opinion that came out of that. There's a lot of options: potential conservation area, neighborhood, riverfront park, and or river access. That is plugged in here with potential funding sources, but that's all it is. It's a placeholder for right now. Then we moved on to the transportation section. I won't go over that because I'll have to update it based on whatever's adopted in the TIP tonight. And then, like I said before, the utilities for sewer, there was nothing included for that, for capital, but there were several water projects, and so these were pulled directly from the water CIP. If there's any changes to that, I'll have to get these updated before this is adopted. And then the last category was, like I said, the vehicles and equipment. These were taking the most expensive vehicles. Several of them are ones used by utilities, And so I'm actually conversing with Dave that how we fund these. But I believe looking at utilities is more of an enterprise fund, so the city utility fund could finance these vehicles when needed. They are, most importantly, the 2007 Ford F-250 with the service box is long overdue. So that one I plugged in at 2027, and then it goes all the way up to 2036 with the leaf back. That was one of the newer pieces of equipment. Alright, and the last piece of this, oh I'm sorry, the leaf back wasn't the last. The 2016 Caterpillar mini excavator replacement was the last in 2036. And then Washington State Department of Commerce guidebook, they make one for small jurisdictions, and I put in what the purposes of the capital facilities plan are. And so one of the biggest things, it helps avoid surprises. So it gives a guideline for the city to accommodate growth and to accommodate the capital facilities that are needed. That was a very, very quick overview, but I wanted to make sure to leave time for questions and conversation with Planning Commission and Council.
So, why don't, to keep it orderly, why don't we open it up for questions for our Planning Commission first, because they've had the most hands-on experience with it, so if they have questions, it might inform council more. So, Mike, take it away.
Any questions? Commissioner Wu? Commissioner Rickard? Commissioner Beasley? I have no questions. Commissioner Molitor?
We've been through this so many times. All in favor, say aye.
I'll turn it back to you, Mr.
I was just gonna ask Planning Commission, is there any insight or anything that you guys want to elaborate to council on? Sitting at the steering committee of elected officials, I know the lift that you have to do on this, particularly as a small jurisdiction. And so I thank you all for wading into this with eyes open, doing a labor of Hercules type jobs in the stables there, cleaning things out. But if you guys have picked up anything that, or see anything as part of this that you think council should be aware of, please take this opportunity.
Well, a comment I'll make is it is very, very nice that we have Commissioner Beasley on our commission with us. Her knowledge of the history of Millwood and what has gone on in the past and what former commissions have seen for the future of Millwood, her insight to that is invaluable. Her and Amanda worked when there were some questions up and some history things came up and things like that. Her and Amanda actually got together and came up with some proper wording and stuff for that. And so that's greatly appreciated. And it has been a deep lift. And but I appreciate all the commissioners that have done on this. And we've had some great conversations about some areas that we may have had some difficulty with. But at the end of the day, we worked through it. And I think what we've presented is we've got a pretty doggone good comprehensive plan going on. So.
I've got a comment that we've worked on this, the comprehensive plan part, and we refined a lot of the language, and a lot of it's been refined to be kind of open-ended. So the real trick, I think, is going to be when we get to the development regulations, because we're getting to the specifics, and it's going to be a neat trick to try to get what the state is requiring that will fit with all of our vision of Millwood. And so this, when we get to that, will be a time for the council to really be paying attention and figure out how we're going to do what the state is making us do.
That was a lot of information to digest. Now, when I was on the planning commission, we dealt with a sign revision once in a while. I couldn't imagine back on that. Holy cow, good job.
The sign revision was a big deal.
It was a big deal. It's pretty small fries compared to
We have that coming too.
You guys were lightweights.
So questions to Amanda or to the planning commission from the council on anything?
Just on the sewer side of things, there's no plan for, updating the lift stations or anything that has service license
So,
for 10 years.
talking with Matt Erdahl, there was nothing that came out that reached the $20,000 threshold. He named off a few projects and they were all under that. And so I was like, all right. And Welch Comer didn't have anything to add on it. Their big thing was with the transportation side and just making sure we get the streets classified as we should, so we can have additional funding opportunities.
I think we're fortunate that the sewers were,
Static mostly.
yeah, and they were put in with more modern materials, and our lift stations tend to be easy to operate, and the guys switch out the pumps when they need to be switched out. So it just kind of, as long as it stays together, it keeps doing what it's doing.
That's what I figured. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss anything.
Well, one of the nice things around here is, man, they really buried that thing deep. And we don't get a lot of interference from roots and things like that as part of our main system. So it works in our favor for the level of effort they went to when they upgraded the system. Mr. Sander.
So all the very confusing legislative issues, let alone the department's issues. I'm glad to see that the other categories of equipment included, because that even in water systems they frequently forget to look at the equipment as they're doing their evaluations, and then we never really do a roads evaluation for equipment or anything any other on a routine basis. So of the changes, that was a very good change, and you've done a very good job of getting them all listed.
And that was from the Public Works inventory. So they had a few different versions of that. I just had to kind of gather it and compile it.
That's very good. That's a good move. I don't know how you guys kept up with all this other stuff. I hope there's not a quiz, because I'm going to sneak out of here if there is.
Nice presentation.
Yes, very good.
Very good.
So I have a question. Should we have some type of contingency in there for unforeseen?
If there was something that came on the horizon that they weren't sure of, I would have put a placeholder in. I didn't hear anything. So I, like, and all
That's
you
why they're
sewer is.
unforeseen.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, even saying that, okay, well, the sewer pipe is 100 years old, so it's inevitable something's gonna come up. That didn't even come up in here. There is the opportunity, obviously, once a year, the capital facilities plan can be updated. If something comes in 3 years down the road, we look at it that time and update accordingly. All throughout the comp plan, I think in like 3 to 5 locations, I have the requirement that if we ever cannot meet our capital facilities requirements, we have to go back and reassess land use and growth. And so that's a requirement of the state, and that's in here. And so if that ever happens, that's an immediate put a pause. We gotta look at this year.
I think from insurance purposes, our largest contingency would be failure of the standpipe. That would be the one thing that would be it would be a most immediate need and highest cost element for anything that the city owns and operates. Anything else is relatively minor compared to having to demo and then reconstruct a failed standpipe. So that's been, as part of the water capital improvement plan or capital plan, that's being taken into account there. So I'm sure that as we move forward, as the city moves forward, revising these periodically, there'll be better input on how the water capital improvement plan is going to look at funding off on those horizons, and they can be loaded back into the comp plan. Anything Anything else? Appreciate the time for the update. We appreciate planning commission coming and having Amanda walk through everything. So if there's no,
I actually have one question for council.
okay.
Did you guys see anything in here that was inconsistent for what you were envisioning? Project-wise, housing development-wise, anything that you see that just stands out that may be an issue when it comes time to adopt this fall?
For myself, I appreciate the opportunities for that combined commercial, residential opportunities there. You know, I think that's how we can get some our dwelling units, because the rest of it's pretty. I mean, we're going to,
Yeah.
but it's going to be kind of rough going,
Yeah.
you know, in redeveloping of our developed neighborhoods.
The mixed use wasn't factored in before, and so that's actually one of the biggest ways we were able to meet our 106 without major changes to the existing zoning.
So I have one little question. How much is Commerce holding you up on their defining how we're gonna implement things? Are you waiting on
Not
Commerce?
yet.
Okay.
No, we are actually slightly ahead of the other jurisdictions right now. And we had some questions that came out of the planning commission meeting. Commerce just got back to me last week, and it was concerning some data inconsistencies. And specifically, when you look at 2020 census data versus ACS data versus this data, things weren't quite matching up. Bobby called out some of the sections. I've got answers back, and we'll get those corrected. And so then we won't have misinterpretation potential for the data.
Do you wanna summarize what that was? I just happened to have been at that
it was-
planning meeting when you guys were talking about it.
It was the biggest was dealing with the racially disparate impacts analysis and the persons of color population in Millwood. The census, as Bobby showed, it was a couple hundred. Okay, significant
The
difference.
margin error was bigger than the
Big,
number.
yeah, big margin of error.
But yeah, the ACS data
Yeah,
had the huge margin of error. The
And the-
census should have been, everybody counted one for one.
yeah, and the
It's
census showed a much larger population in the persons of color households
Yeah.
than what the ACS data
Right.
showed. And so, summarizing what Commerce said is we can be flexible in that section on what data we use.
Right.
And so, I will be going through and updating it based on their comments.
Perfect,
Yes.
because in the census always overrides some calculation at a staff level.
Yeah, and they were using data predominantly between the census, the ACS, which is the 5 and the 3 year, and then the HUD data. And so some of it wasn't playing nice, and part of it was because of the large margin of error because Millwood is so small. Millwood doesn't have the advantage that the bigger jurisdictions do. And unfortunately, some of the resources that we would have had have since been, you go to the website, it doesn't exist anymore at the federal level. And so Commerce had to assist me with coming up with some alternatives for that as well.
That's exciting. Well, I do wanna thank you for addressing the townhouse issue, and I love that you added pictures of an example that was in Millwood for some of these things, cause we see these stock photos and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't want anything like that in our neighborhood, but you provided nice pictures.
Yeah, and that's what it's really all about, is we have these requirements that are being put on all the jurisdictions in the state. How can we best make them fit to what is within Millwood already without majorly changing the character?
Mr. Sanders.
My thanks to you and to the planning commission for the oftentimes confusing but heavy discussions you've had, you know, and the product that we see at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. I might add, Amanda's getting a lot of credit. Lisa has been amazing as well, so we have a real great team here in Millwood, so.
Thank you.
So any other comments, questions, anything for the good of the order? So at this time, Mr. Ankeny, would you like to close your planning commission meeting?
I will entertain a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting. So moved. Second,
I'll second.
all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody? Meeting adjourned.
Do I have a motion to adjourn city council?
I make motion to
Moved and seconded, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And none opposed, city council meeting is adjourned, and that concludes our joint special meeting of the city council and planning commission. Thank you all very much. We will reconvene here in about 7 minutes for the city